Hello, welcome to English Literature Link. Today we can discuss about new criticism. New criticism, its key terms, critics and representative texts related to new criticism. Actually, I was intended to discuss about structuralism. But before getting into structuralism and structuralist analysis of texts, I thought it's better to talk about new criticism. Only after having a after getting some surface level idea about new criticism, we can move on to structuralist analysis or structuralism. So, new criticism, when you hear about new criticism, it is associated with, you know that it's associated with a close reading of the text. Close reading of the text. You might have heard that a text is autotelic in nature. A text is self contained or it is autotelic in nature. So, what is the context or historical context in which new criticism evolved? New criticism is a 20th century phenomenon. It's originated in the United States and its development was influenced by a couple of historical contexts. We can say that new criticism is a reaction against romantic aspects, where romanticism emphasizes on others' emotions as well as intentions rather than a text autonomy. Right? New critic says that a text is self-contained; it is autotelic. You should not go for the others emotions or intentions of others in order to read, in order to derive at a meaning, because you simply look into the semantic structures or you simply look into what is there in the text rather than going behind the emotional content of the carried by emotional content carried by author or some biographical details of the author so that you can link that things into the text. No extraneous features entities are allowed to get into the matrix of the text. When you ask what a text means, we can say that text can be considered as a matrix interwoven with words and meanings. In layman terms, I mean. So, new criticism emerged in early 20th century in United States. It can be considered as a reaction against romanticism. And this movement aligned with formalist trend in arts and literature. Formalism focuses on forms of linguistic structures, like its intrinsic qualities rather than external factors. So this new criticism gained its momentum in American universities, where it became dominant approach to literary studies. It emphasized on rigorous textual analysis, and some new critics like J.C. or John Crow Ransom who is associated with Southern agrarian movement. He has critiqued industrialization as well as modernity, and this context also influenced um, their focus on tradition as well as craftsmanship in literature. This new criticism reflected that century's fascination with scientific precision, applying systematic methods to literary analysis. And in the earlier 20th century, it's you can see a post-war intellectual climate is there, right? Post-war intellectual climate is there, and its reflection after First World War. Lots of the trends was it was lots of literary trend was getting a grand shift towards retrospection as well as search for meaning, stability, and all. And in this context, precisely in this context, new criticism provides through its focus. Says the text itself is a self-contained entity, or text is autotelic in nature. You should not look for meaning outside the text, right? But rather consider text as an autotelic entity. So, new criticism, it seems like new criticism advocates for close reading of the text. That means a text can be understood in its own terms through detailed analysis of its linguistic structures like language, literary devices used in its semantics or meanings, its word choice, tone in the text, imagery in the text. So all these aspects can contribute to its meaning. You have to go for a close reading of the text, says new critics. And new critics also argued that a literary work is self-contained. You should not interpret the text based on author's biography. Say, for example, if you feel that this author has got some Marxist lineations, okay, fine. So the very symbol, the red symbol, which is frequented in this text, may stands for his some Marxist connotations. No, you should not go for such things. You have to discard author's intention and his identity completely, but rather see red color as color in the text, and derive at the meaning in terms of its context. In text, when you come to text, this context become context. Context means, context refers to the surrounding linguistic materials within a text, which can be used for the interpretation of a particular word, phrase, or even sentences. So context is a part of the broader context, concept of context. But co-text, co-hyphen text, it specifically deals with the textual environment, where the words and linguistic structures immediately around the language is considered. So the cortex provides clues to help or determine the meaning of some ambiguous words or phrases. Then this cortex can dictate how we interpret grammatical structures, and these words often occurs together in specific patterns, like, or cortex reveals these patterns, right? So cortex is important. Context is a similar thing, just like context. When you come to linguistic environment, we can use the term context instead of context. That's all. So the text is considered as an autonomous entity. The new critics argued that a literary work is self-contained. It should not be interpreted based on author's biography, his political ideologies, or rather, um, in accordance with some historical context where this text is produced. Two important terms pertaining to this new criticism are intentional fallacy as well as effective fallacy. So, what do you mean by intentional fallacy? So, it's a term which is indebted to Wimsatt and Beardsley. So, Wimsatt and Beardsley says that, coined this term, which suggests that, it postulates that the author's intention is not at all relevant to the understanding of a work of art. You should not go for the intention of the author, his political leanings, and all. Forget about the author when you interpret a work of art. You should not go for his biographical details, and you should not think about the author, and you should not connect author's intention with what is mentioned in the text. So, when you read a text as per, by taking into consideration, by taking author's intention into consideration, a fallacy is liable to occur in your reading, which is termed as intentional fallacy. It is considered as a fallacy in the atmosphere of new criticism because new criticism always go for um, autotelic nature of text. It believes in the autotelic nature of the text, or it perceives text as an autonomous entity which is self-contained. You should not interpret a text based on author's biography, his political ideas, or even his intention, or the historical context in which the author produces a work of art. Now, effective fallacy. Affective fallacy points towards the emotional response of the reader. And affective fallacy means you should not judge a work of art by taking into consideration the emotional effects or emotional responses produced by author. Sorry, emotional response produced by reader. Emotional responses of a reader. So affective fallacy is again a term introduced by W.K. Wimsatt and Monroe Beardsley in their essay of the same name. And it critiques the idea that a reader's emotional response to a literary work should not influence or determine its interpretation. So they say that you should focus on the text and not the reader. So affective fallacy argues that you should not rely on audience emotions, or so that you should not judge a work of art based on emotion, so response of reader, because author's responses is highly subjective. Readers' reactions are highly subjective in nature. It varies from person to person, right? This variability makes emotional responses highly unreliable. for forming some objective interpretation of the work. So you should not interpret a work of art based on responses of the reader as well. In intentional fallacy, Wimsatt and Beardsley says that you should not go for intention of the author, right, in order to interpret a work of art. In affective fallacy, these critics says that you should not go for responses of the readers in order to make an interpretation of the work of art. It calls for, so you can see that this new criticism, this approach contrasts with reader response criticism. That's a slightly different thing. So new critics then say, actually new critics want to maintain some kind of discipline and focused approach towards textual analysis, ensuring that works' formal elements like language, structure, and symbolism are prioritized over subjective emotional reactions. So, how key postulates of new criticism is clear. Now, important critiques related to um, new criticism. So, new criticism was shaped by several influential figures who contributed significantly to its development. Most important among them is John Crowe Ransom, who himself has coined the term new criticism. So, he is considered as the father of new criticism, who coined the term in his work, The New Criticism, written in 1941. So, So, John Crowe Ransom coined the term in his book, The New Criticism, written in the year 1941. He emphasized close reading of the text. He emphasized on the intrinsic value of the text. Next is Cleon Brooks. He is known for his works like The Well-Wrought Urn. The Well-Wrought Urn is published in the year 1947, where he introduces phrases like heresy of paraphrase. Now, see, Cleon Brooks, The Well-Wrought Urn is important, and also heresy of paraphrase. This phrase, heresy of paraphrase, argues that a poem's meaning cannot be separated from its form. Poem's meaning cannot be separated from his form. Do you mean by paraphrase? Paraphrase. So we are talking about The Well-Wrought Urn of Cleon Brooks, where he says about heresy of paraphrase, which is a concept introduced by Cleon Brooks and in his influential work, The Well-Wrought Urn, published in 1947. It's a very important point. So heresy of paraphrase argues that the meaning of a poem or any literary text cannot be fully captured or expressed through paraphrasing. Paraphrasing simply means a line by line translation. Line by line translation. So if you attempt to reduce a literary work into simpler summary or message or paraphrase, here you are actually ignoring its intrinsic form and its linguistic complexity, says Cleon Brooks. And Brooks stressed that the meaning of a literary work or poem is inseparable from its form. So, how can you paraphrase? When you translate it or when you paraphrase it, it's specific choice of words. Every poem, especially in poems, choice of words is very important, right? So, it's specific, unique choice of words, its unique rhythm, its imagery, structure, all these things which are integral to meaning are actually diminishes, right? And consequently this paraphrase can affect or can diminish the poem's essence, right? So according to this idea, poetry and literature possess profoundness, a kind of profoundness that transcends this paraphrase or symbol translation. So a poem is not just a vehicle for a message, but rather it has got its aesthetic realms, right? It is capable of producing emotional impact that derives from the interplay of its formal linguistic structures or formal elements. So you can say that this can be considered as a critique of reductionism, where the heresy of paraphrase challenges approaches that treat literature as a direct expression of some ideology, some moral lessons, or some other insights, advocating rather than it advocates for close attention of the linguistic text itself. For that, you have to pay attention to its formalist elements, structures. So that's all about The Well-Wrought Urn, which is written by Cleon Brooks, that carries important postulates of new criticism. Now we have already seen Wimsatt and Beardsley, right? When we discussed about affective fallacy as well as intentional fallacy. So both these figures are seminal figures with respect to um, this, with respect to our new criticism. So W. K. Wimsatt and Monroe Beardsley, they introduced the concepts of intentional fallacy as well as affective fallacy, which argue against considering author's intent, or reader's emotional response in the analysis of a text. So another important um, figure is Alan Tate and Robert Penn Warren. Before that, we can also discuss about T.S. Eliot is there. T.S. Eliot is not a strictly new critics, but his essays like tradition and the tradition and the individual talent influence the movement, particularly his ideas on impersonality in art. When we discuss about literary criticism, we can go for Tradition and the Individual Talent by T.S. Eliot, which is a 1919 work, which is a critical essay, which says about the relationship between the individual point as well as the canon of literature that precedes that point, right? So, Tradition and the Individual Talent, which is an important work by T.S. Eliot, which is not discussing about the principles of new criticism, but these essays also influence the movement, we can say. Now, I.A. Richards, his work, I.A. Richards' Practical Criticism, which is published in the year 1929, which also laid the groundwork for the close reading of the text. I.A. Richards' Practical Criticism, published in 1929. That's important. Now, William Empson's, it's his work, Seven Types of Ambiguity, written in 1930, which is also important. The I.A. Richards' Practical Criticism, published in 1929, as well as William Empson's Seven Types of Ambiguity, published in 1930. This also aligns with these works and these critics, T.S. Eliot, I.A. Richards, William Empson's. These writers also aligns with new criticism. And another important critic is Alan Tate, who says about tension in poetry. Alan Tate's tension in poetry. So, Alan Tate's concept of tension. Alan Tate described this tension as dynamic interplay between two types of meaning in poetry. Every poem consists of two types of meaning. Which are the two types of meaning in poetry? First one, when you read poem, when you scan poem, you will get a literal surface level meaning of words, right? This literal or surface meaning of text is known as denotative meaning or extensive meaning. Denotation means surface level meaning of words. Then after that, when you go deeper into the into the poem, into the work of art, you will get some kind of implied meaning. This implied metaphorical or hidden meaning of a text is known as its connotative meaning or intensive meaning. So there will be a surface level literal meaning. On the other hand, there will be an implied meaning in the text. So there arises some kind of tension between these two meaning, that is denotative meaning as well as connotative meaning. Denotation means literal level or surface level meaning of words. Connotation means implied or metaphorical or even hidden meaning of the text. There arises some kind of tension between this denotative meaning as well as connotative meaning. So a good poem, according to Alan Tate, achieves a balance between these two aspects, creates a state of tension, and this tension enriches the overall impact of the poem. So for Alan Tate, this presence of tension can be considered as a touchstone of good poetry. So Alan Tate believed that this tension is essential for the coherence or unity of a poem. This tension ensures poems' form and ensures that poems' form as well as content are highly intertwined, and this tension gives a cohesive structure and meaning for the work of art, believes Alan Tate. Next is Robert Penn Warren. So Robert Penn Warren has co-authored Understanding Poetry. Understanding Poetry is an influential work co-authored by Cleanne Brooks as well as Robert Penn Warren. So it played a significant role in shaping new criticism. So Understanding Poetry, written in the year 1938, is not just some collection of poems, but rather than it can be considered as a guide for analyzing poetry through the principles of new criticism. It focuses on the close reading of the text. It focuses on the unified meaning of the text. Can be considered as a practical approach where it provides readers with some methods for analyzing poems, um, by some kind of appreciation for the intrinsic qualities of poetic text. So thus we have discussed about important critiques related to new criticism. Now, the verbal icon is the verbal icon, then the new criticism. All these works are also some seminal text when you come to new criticism. So new criticism has its own applications, like it teaches us how to analyze a text, how to interpret a text by focusing on the intrinsic qualities of the text, like imagery, paradox, irony, and also structure, other semantic or syntactic structures contained in the text. Now, criticism of new criticism. That is, some critics believes that this new critics actually overemphasize on the text. They it isolates the text from its broader cultural, historical, as well as social context. See, here lies the significance of structuralism. A structuralist thinkers believes that every smaller structure can be connected with their larger structures. Say, for example, when you are reading a poem is connected with its semantic level, its meaning. There will be phrases are there. These smaller structures like words, phrases, meanings, all these things contributes to poem. This poem can be understood in comparison with other genres in literatures like novel, fiction, drama, and all. And it can be um, connected with further broader linguistic structure or broader term literature, and this literature has got its own relationship with the broader culture, broader context of culture, right? So every structures are interrelated, says structuralism, not new criticism. That's why we have discussed about new criticism first, then we are moving on to structuralism. When you focuses on to new criticism, we can see that new critics completely ignores the broader cultural, historical, as well as social context. Rather than this focuses solely on the autonomy of the text, which results in some kind of incomplete understanding of literature. Now, not only that, new critics dismisses authorial intent or intentional fallacy basis. They calls this intention of the author as intentional fallacy, and they reject the intention of the author. So some critics believe that understanding an author's purpose and background can actually enrich the interpretation of a work, right? But new critics rejects intention of the author. They say it's intentional fallacy, right? Moreover, now you can easily um, think that they also dismisses along with intentional fallacy what is their effective fallacy, right? So by dismissing, they also dismisses readers emotional as well as subjective reactions of the works. So new criticism disregards the interactive nature of reading, right? So that means new criticism disregards interactive nature of reading and how text resonates differently to individual readers or readers. That is not at all a consideration for these new critics, but rather they are giving overemphasis on the form and structure of the text. So, new criticism has been criticized for prioritizing this canonical Western literature and ignoring works from the marginalized voices and culture. Its methodologies are sometimes viewed as rigid as well as exclusionary. And new critics' approach does not engage with issues like gender, class, political ideologies, and all. And some also may criticized this new criticism for its reductionism. Some argue the new criticism is intense focus on formal aspects, formal elements of the text like language structure and all, can lead to an overly narrow or reductionist interpretation which misses a broader thematic or philosophical scope of literature. So this new criticism was actually eclipsed by later theories in the due course of time, like structuralism, post-structuralism, deconstruction, reader response criticism, etc. These approaches, these isms have offered more dynamic ways to explore text, often incorporating the aspects of this offer in this new approaches, postulates of new criticism in their context often face some kind of ignorance. So, despite these critics, new criticism has its own legacy, especially with respect to close reading as well as the intrinsic study of literary form. That's always there. So hope you have enjoyed the session. Thank you. Thanks for listening.